Hello everyone, welcome to our Facebook Live session. Here we are at the World Health Organization in Geneva, and I have with me today an expert from our vaccine department, Dr. Martin Freider. Welcome to this session. We're going to be talking about influenza today, otherwise known as the flu, and feel free to send in your questions about the vaccine or anything else you want to know about the flu. Just go for it, send them in and we'll try to answer them as best as we can. So, first question. Well, first observation I would like to make is that we seem to be hearing a lot about cases of flu, more cases of flu this year than normal in the Northern Hemisphere. Is that something we should be concerned about? What's happening?
So this year there are definitely more cases than we were having last year and more than we had the year before, but this is not an exceptional year. So while there is a lot of influenza this year, it is only more than we had in 2015. So this type of level of influenza, it happens every few years. People forget that influenza is a common disease, it's also a severe disease.
Okay, so a lot of people can die from it though. I mean, how many are we talking about?
So every year we think there are between 300 and 600,000 people who die every year. And there are millions of people that are hospitalized because of influenza. So the numbers we are seeing this year, yes, it's more than last year, but it's not exceptional.
Okay, so how can we protect ourselves against the flu?
Well, the first and best means of protecting yourself against influenza is to get the influenza vaccine. But if the vaccine only provides one level of protection, washing your hands, blowing your nose into tissue papers to prevent spread to other people, it's the vaccine and overall hygiene.
So tell us, how is flu spread?
The flu is spread mainly as an aerosol. So the aerosol typically is coming out of your nose and your mouth. But if you put your hand in front of your mouth and sneeze into your hand, and you then touch the door handle, and somebody then touches the door handle and then wipes their mouth, guess what? You've transmitted influenza to that person.
So we could say that it's very easily transmitted compared to some diseases.
It is a highly transmissible disease.
All right. So should we be worrying about a flu pandemic? I mean, could this be a flu pandemic this season, or what's the...
We should be worrying about a pandemic. This year is the 100th anniversary of the 1918 so-called Spanish influenza. That killed more people than the whole of the First World War. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. There is going to be another influenza pandemic. The influenza virus is constantly mutating. It moves from birds into pigs, pigs into humans and back again. It is constantly mutating, and one day there will be a mutation that comes along, which means it can be transmitted readily from one person to the next, but it's also a strain to which we have no prior immunity. That could be very dangerous for the global human population. So we need to continually be monitoring to see, is there a new strain coming up? Is it being transmitted from human to human? And be ready to get the manufacturers to make vaccine, not just the vaccine now for the pregnant women and the elderly and the young, but a vaccine for everybody, because in the event of a pandemic, everybody is going to be at risk.
Okay. But going back to that idea of having of a pandemic potentially being around the corner, how does it spread? I mean, or is the risk? I'm just trying to think. How would you say it spreads worldwide? Is it on aeroplanes, or what's the means of spreading this?
Well, there are many ways that it can be spread. The primary is, especially in the case of a pandemic, it is going to be human to human. But since it spreads so readily, it's going to be almost impossible to prevent the spread by preventing people traveling. So since we are all on aeroplanes all the time and traveling from Geneva through to Bombay on to Shanghai, to Beijing, to Seattle and Washington, D.C., the spread around the world is going to be very, very quick. However, influenza, unlike many other diseases, is also transmitted by some of the livestock that we live with. So birds can transmit influenza, as can pigs. And it is this close proximity between humans, birds and pigs that can lead to the mixing of bird flu with pig flu, with human flu, and this could result one day in the resurgence of a strain which is able to go from human to human, but we've never seen before. that is going to be the beginning of a pandemic.
So actually, would have to say that there's no way you could stop it from spreading. There's just so many ways it could spread that our mechanism is the best defense would be a vaccine.
The best defense
and
is
potentially
a vaccine,
a good treatment.
Treatments, and learning how to minimize the spread from person to person.
And we were talking before we came on camera about some of the people who die or who have other problems when they get flu. For example, an older person might have flu and they may die of something else. Can you tell us a bit about that?
The numbers that we have for people who die from influenza, a lot of them will not have been diagnosed as having died from influenza. So what we see is something we call excess mortality, that in the winter we see people dying of, there's an increased number of heart attacks, there's an increased number of strokes, there's even an increased number of people falling down the stairs and breaking their hips. And a lot of this is actually due to influenza. So you can imagine somebody with influenza feeling very weak, getting out of bed, they're already elderly. With the influenza, they lose, because of the influenza and the fever and the delirium, they lose their balance, they fall over, they break their leg. This goes down in the autopsy as broken leg, not as influenza. So this is where we measure excess mortality. And if you have got problems with if you've got cardiac problems, if you've got atherosclerosis, and you get influenza, the influenza could trigger that final straw that breaks the camel's back, and you will could die of something that looks like a heart attack, something that looks like a stroke, but in actual fact it was triggered by the influenza.